and I've had some experience with ESOP. I would just love to hear how my experience relate with what's current, what's going to be the way moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, as you guys may know, Andrew is actually the co-founder of Makan for Hope. Okay, next can we have Arif Haker? How do you pronounce the name?
Hi, hello.
Yeah, hi.
Hi, I'm actually from Svested. Yeah, I'm actually just their business development executive here working at Svested. So I'm just here looking forward to the event and to see what I can learn from this event.
Okay, nice to know. Okay, can we have Patricia? Okay, we'll just wait a few more minutes for the rest of participants to enter.
Everyone, as we are waiting, I thought I would just give an introduction as well. So so together, Andrew and I, we are the co-founder of MFH. So just want to welcome everybody for this session. So this is already the fourth MFH Webinar Series. So previously, Makan for Hope are like physical in-person sessions that we have at social enterprises. But because of COVID, we are unable to meet face-to-face. So we are having webinar in the meantime. And the idea is to help equip founders with the right useful knowledge and know-how, and also obviously provide the avenue to network as well. So this is the fourth one, and previously we have discussed different topics. The first one being, never run out of cash. So that was budgeting and also understanding how to spend big budget expenses wisely. Then we have also a session about how to build a mobile app strategy. Last session we had was with Chao, who founded the Asian Institute of Mentoring and other foundations. So he was sharing with us with his own venture creation journey. So today we are going to learn more about ESOP. So I hope you have useful takeaway from this session. Yeah, so I'll hand my time over back to my team, Everett. I think we can start.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Makan for Hope webinar today. My name is Everett, and I work closely with Elise at Asia Startup Network. And today we are particularly excited to bring to you this unique event. We have the CEO of Svested, Casper Peh, who will be sharing how you can leverage ESOP for a startup growth strategy. So Casper, we're so honored to have you joining us today. And thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us. Okay, maybe I give a short introduction of Casper. So Casper started as a co-founder of The Mobile Gamer. It's a venture-backed company which did 2 rounds of fundraising before the partial buyout by Singtel and SoftBank. Thereafter, he did 1 year of equity trading before moving on to become CFO, COO of Wildfire. He got his second exit when the company merged with Linkfluence via a share swap in 2015. Between mid-2016 to 2018, Casper worked on pricing strategy and unit economics in Laku 6 before finally joining Golden Gate Ventures as a head of portfolio finance. So throughout his career, Casper Peh has completed one buyout, one merger, and 7 rounds of fundraising. He also has at least 13 years of experience in management, finances, operations, and fundraising and licensing with various stakeholders of the company. So let's start with the agenda. So we have a number of topics planned for our conversation today, but we also do want to know what questions you have for Casper. So do feel free to ask the questions in our Q&A session later, or even during the session itself. So just raise your hands and we'll attend it to you. Okay, Casper, do you want to start?
Yes. Hello. Hi. Are you able to see me? Yeah. Standard question. Are you able to see me? That's how we start the conversation usually. So hi. Firstly, thank Elise and thank Makan for Hope. For giving us the opportunity to share about ESOP. So ESOP is a topic that is that is very important to the startup ecosystem. But unfortunately, ESOP is not, widely understood. So I think in Svested, what we want is that we want to help founders to understand more about ESOP and how they can utilize it for growth. And also for the employees, how they can actually benefit, by joining a startup and growing with a startup and how they can benefit it, financially. So I prepared some slides. So I'll be going a lot more on, like, let's say what is exactly is ESOP, and we will leave a lot of so-called the discussions to the Q&A. So we have a longer Q&A sessions because some of the question may be a bit more specific. I think as Everett was mentioning, during the presentations, if you have any question that you want to ask, just feel free to raise your hand, and then we will, we can pause and then we can answer your questions. So
0 minus 1 minus 3 1 0 1 1 1 and then
okay. Okay, so for because Everett, just a quick note, because when I'm presenting, it will be on the full screen, so I can't really see the chat. So if there's anyone that raise hand, maybe just let me know lah. Yeah, at the when I jump to the next slide. Yeah.
Sure, noted.
Thank you.
Okay.
So okay, let me just present my screen. Share screen. Okay. So can see my presentation slide, right? Everett, are you able to see my slide?
Yep, I'm able to see your slide.
Okay, good. So I'll
Okay,
just start.
that's good.
Okay. So yeah. So I mean, today I'm here to share about ESOP. So the flow of presentation would be this: is that the first 3 parts is more about general about ESOP. So the first thing people that will ask is that, what exactly is ESOP? What is it all about? Then the second question is that why do we want to use ESOP instead of other mechanism, or why do you want to use ESOP and administer? The third one is that we will also discuss or share with you about what are the opportunities and challenges about implementing an ESOP for Southeast Asia startup. Okay. And then after that, the other part of the presentations will be on, a bit more specific and technical. Like for example, the first part, it will be, the different type of employee stock option scheme. Like what is the difference between ESOP, RSU and phantom shares, which some of you may have if you have so-called work on ESOP before, you will know that this is a question that you always will have. Number 5, I'll share about some misconception about ESOP, like some of the terminology and what are they different. And number 6, which is the most important part and where we will end off, is that, how we go about to do some planning for some key terms, such as, the question of how much to give, and what's the strike price to so-called to set and all this. So that is for point number 6. So let's start from here. So the first thing is this, is that, as a startup founders and even for, employees, the first question when they see ESOP is that they will ask, what is ESOP? I mean, in short, it is actually called Employee Stock Option Plan. You may have heard of another term called the ESOPs, which is ESOS. And that's exactly the same thing, but it just means that it is Employee Stock Option Scheme instead of Employee Stock Option Plan. So if people mention about ESOP or ESOS, technically they are referring to the same thing. So why is an ESOP? It is actually an employment benefit that gives employees the opportunity to own a part of the company they work for, usually presented as an option to buy shares of the company. So in a startup, when you want to make your initial hires, in order to make it sweeten the deal, because you cannot fight financially with the big corporates, what you actually give is that you offer them ESOP, which is a chance for them to own the shares. And because they join early, where the valuation is still a bit on the lower side, what it means is that they have tremendous upside if they were to be able to contribute to the company and if the company go well. So this is how you align employee interest with the employer interest. So some of the example is that, startups will succeed in recruiting and retaining talents, employees. So that's how you use ESOP, and you can also use ESOP to actually motivate or even reward, employees with outstanding performance. And lastly, ESOP is used for loyalty and retentions, because in early stage company, human capital is your best resources, or is the most important resources, the talent. So if you were to lose talent at the early stage, it will actually impact on the productivity and the survival of the company. And ESOP is here to help you to retain talents. Next question will be, why ESOP? So ESOP is a powerful tool. So as per mentioned just now, it strengthens the team's performance by motivating employees through aligning their interests with the company interests. Next, it creates benefit from both the founders and the employees. It creates a strong company culture, because those that receive ESOP, they will feel that they are part of the company and they will feel more sense of ownership. And this will create a stronger culture within the company. And also studies have shown, based off research, it will help the company conserve cash by up to 25%. So for example, if you want to make a so-called a strong hire at this stage, and you're not able to, I would say compensate them, adequately, what you do is that you use ESOP, as a form of top up, and with ESOP as well as salary, and you can use that to match what they are currently receiving, or even slightly higher than that. So next, I'll talk about the opportunities and challenges for Southeast Asia startup. The firstly we talk about is the is the opportunities. So ESOP in Southeast Asia actually has been growing tremendously. So what we see is that in 2010, this is the startup investment. In 2010, the investment in Southeast Asia startup is only about 149 million. But what you see is that in 2018 onwards, it has grown a lot. In 2020, the venture-backed investment in Southeast Asia reached $8.2 billion. It's about a 55 times increase, from 2010. So that's very impressive. And as you all know, when you do an investment, investors usually take about 20 to 25% equity. So if you translate to that, it means that the ESOP pool, in 2020 is well in excess of about $3.3 billion. So it's actually a lot of money in ESOP, and this is only taking 10%. Assuming that it's 15 or 20% of the ESOP pool of the company, it will be in excess of about $4.5 billion to $6 billion worth of ESOP. So it is actually very, very significant. Number two, also in recent years, what we see is that there's a lot of growing emphasis on ESOP. So company like Stashaway, Carousel, and even Niam has mentioned a lot about ESOP, like how they need to incorporate certain ESOP buyback in terms of their later fundraising round, so that early employees will start to see the benefit of ESOP. By having early employees able to cash out on some of the ESOP, it will reinforce, the idea that ESOP is worth something and not just paper value. So, and we are seeing that a growing trend, with the maturing of the startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia, we are seeing that more and more founders realize the importance of, giving back to early employees through some of the ESOP buyback. And that's why in recent years, and I believe that going forward, we're going to see more and more founders talking about ESOP and to add a better image on how ESOP can be used for hiring. Number three, we are also seeing that there's more unicorns and companies going public. Like for example, Grab, Bukalapak, Garena and all this. So what it means is that we are actually beginning to see, the first group of employees that actually benefits, from ESOP. So you have people from Grab where they have an ESOP buyback program. That's from my friend that's working there. And so Bukalapak, where just go public, some of the employees that have received ESOP. So, and this trend will just continue to, will continue to grow. Like as more and more companies reaches a mature state and more companies actually start to go public or becomes unicorn or incorporate an ESOP buyback program in the company. Next, we'll talk about the challenge. So we talk about so much benefit about ESOP and why is it very useful for the startups and even for the employees because they can benefit financially. So why is ESOP still so misunderstood or so little information about ESOP? Is that I think number one, there's a lack of localized knowledge. Because if you were to Google, about ESOP, a lot of information is actually US centric. And what you'll come about is that you'll reach this thing like the 409Ks, and some other things, which is irrelevant to us. So that adds to so-called the lack of localized knowledge. Next, it is often complex because if you look at ESOP, there is actually multiple components. The first component is legal because you need to get the ESOP scheme set up. Next is actually on the finance because you need to handle about the money, the taxations, and also the benefits. And lastly, it handles about HR because you talk about retention, compensation and benefit, and also how you, communicate ESOP with employees. So these are all the challenges. And of course, working in Southeast Asia, although it's a huge market, but we know that it makes up of different countries. So there's actually different legal and tax regulations, in different countries in this region. So that's why, with all of this complexity, it makes it very hard or, for founders and even employees to fully understand about ESOP. Next one is also the challenges, is the picking out the pieces. So just now I was mentioning, in order for our founders to understand about ESOP now, you actually need to talk to multiple stakeholders. Like you need to talk to the lawyer to understand the scheme and the legal aspect, but they will not be able to advise on the account or how you communicate with HR. Same thing for accountant. They will know about the tax concern and all this, but they will not be able to, share, let's say, the so-called the legal aspect. So that's why, you need to talk to multiple parties. And lastly, the two parties, lawyer and accountant, they know about, the execution part, or they just know about the scheme and all this. But in order to communicate it well to your employees and let them understand, you still need the HR to draft the communication in a way that the employees will understand and believe in the benefit of ESOP. So, and of course, so this is the three big challenge because you are talking to multiple sources. And of course, there's the risk of dilution of founder shares if information is incomplete. Because if you do not keep the information, proper, then you may actually have some miscount, and that is actually very bad because it will affect your cap table. Third is of the challenges of ESOP is about the execution side. So what we see here is that, in current world, everything about ESOP is verbal. So what you do is that you actually need to manually create the ESOP file, from Microsoft Words, you update the terms and conditions. Thereafter, you send it to employees to sign. And after you sign, you basically just archive it. So, and a lot of things is verbal, like there's no platform for them to check, what's the value of the ESOP. And, there's usually no follow-up or updates from the HR or the founders because you will only update maybe once a year or, a bit later during fundraising. So it's actually put on the back burner and there is no platform or no place for employees to look at, the ESOP. So what it means is that there is no visualizations, no transparency, clarity, and also certainty of the value of shares. So, and all this brings into the last point as well, which is that, employees are then afraid of not being able to either exercise their options and obtain their shares or not able to, cash out of the ESOP. So these are some of the executional challenge. And fourth, about challenge of ESOP is that we need a champion. So we need someone or some company or a group of people to spearhead for ESOP. We need to not only educate the market, we also need to continue to reinforce the idea of ESOP. And I think that is what a lot of startup founders, the late stage startup founders are doing now. They have been constantly right now trying to, enhance the image of ESOP and trying to keep at so-called announce positive news about ESOP to reinforce the entire system. Also, we need a professional system to add a sense of professionalism, about the ESOP management. And last one is even, we can even create an ESOP community to a group of people that either benefit or actually suffer from horror story of ESOP. So I think this is all about the challenges of ESOP. So before I go on to the next topic, which is more the technical side, Is there any question that the participants have that you want to ask? Okay.
Yeah, guys, feel free to ask any questions.
Sure.
Just raise your hand, yeah. Or you can type in the chat box and I'll ask a question to Casper.
Hi,
Sure.
Casper.
Yes.
Charles here. I just had a question. Maybe you're going to cover it later, but you mentioned a few companies with the percentage of their total shares that they basically tied to ESOPs.
Yes, correct.
Are there some like benchmarks available of like what's common practice, not common practice?
Yes.
And where can we, are these say publicly available, or where can we find information about this? Because usually when we're in a round and that comes up as a discussion, the question is always how can we benchmark to market practices?
Got it. So yeah, so I think the first question on the percentage wise, okay. Yeah, the first one percentage wise, in general, at the early stage startup, at the early stage, I'll say from seed all the way to about series A and B. In general, your ESOP pool is about 10% on a fully diluted basis. So it's about 10%. And at later stage, it may expand to 15 to 20%. 25% for NEOM is an extreme case where they want to have more people involved. But I would say at early stage, a quick benchmark would be 10%. That's pretty standard. If they ask for 15%, then what the investors see is that they probably see that the team will need to make some significant hires. That's why they allocate a bigger percentage at the start.
So that's typically at Series C, basically.
So if it's at Series C and beyond, then in general, I'll say that the ESOP pool can range anything between 10 to 20%. It depends on the utilization rate. So
no, my point was more the top up that you mentioned, where you go from 10 to 15 or 20, typically happens around Series C.
Yes, correct. Around Series C and Series D.
Okay, thanks. Very clear.
Yeah. And the main reason for that is that at Series C, you're at a stage of growth that you may need to hire some very heavyweight person from other industry, like country manager, or like head of the entire business, the so-called the financial arm and all these. So these people, you need to give them, I'll say like between 0.5 to 2%. So that's also the reason why you need to expand.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I will just continue on, and we can leave another more Q&A and discussion session later on. So I think there's no more question for the time being. So next, I'll go through these few instruments. So if you have researched a bit on ESOP, what you will notice is that this thing will come out, like the ESOP, the RSU, and phantom shares. And I do get this question from founders. They're asking me, when I'm in Golden Gates or when I'm talking to other founders in Svested, is that they will ask like, what's the difference between ESOP, RSU and phantom shares? So that's why I thought that, why not I'll just do a basic sharing here, so that at least you have a rough understanding, and then you can determine which one is better suited for you. So so just now we talked about ESOP. So next we talk about RSU. So what is an RSU? So RSU is actually a restricted stock unit. So it is actually company shares that's granted directly to the employees with restrictions. And it typically has a vesting period, and there's no exercise price since the shares are granted directly. So ESOP, if you remember, is that I grant you an options or the right to buy a shares, but you do not own the shares. You own the right to buy the shares. For RSU, it's different. It's that the company will give you the shares directly. And then, of course, you cannot do much with it because there's certain restriction, and the restriction will be lifted depending on how the restrictions are being crafted. Next is phantom shares. So what is phantom shares? So phantom shares is actually the rights to cash equivalent, to the value of the amount, the set amount of stocks. It is actually a form of financial incentive to employees without granting them ownership of the company. So phantom shares, when I was talking to other founders about phantom shares, I will put it in this way, is that when you look at RSU and ESOP, you can look at it as a more equity or more, a stock-based and ownership-based. But when you look at phantom shares, in essence, it is, it's not exactly a shares, that's why there's the word called phantom. So what it means is that phantom shares actually is more like a contract. So it's more like a contract that says that, okay, so you own, X amount of phantom shares, which is like contract, and this is worth X value of dollars. So in the event that a company get bought out, then you will enjoy the financial benefit and only the financial benefits, without the other hustle of the equity and all this. So that's why the way phantom shares is being drafted is that it is more like a contract. You can put it as like a deferred bonus with a potential chance of appreciation, so it's something along that line, more like a contract. And it's often tied to vesting schedule or KPI, as per ESOP and RSU. So now going into a deeper detail. So what we see here is that, just now we talked about what and when already. So we talk about the cost. So when you receive ESOP, there's this thing called the strike price, and you want to exercise your shares or ESOP to convert into shares, you will typically need to pay the company a certain amount of money in order to convert them from options to shares. For RSU and phantom shares, there's no need to, because RSU, the shares has already been awarded. And for phantom shares, in this case, it is a contract. So you only benefit it, upon as a liquidation event or upon exit. And of course, the last two columns is what that is most important, or what's on everybody's mind is that how would I get taxed? So, and this is where it really differentiates. So for ESOP, based on our understanding, is that in Singapore, you will be taxed, when you choose to exercise the shares. And the tax amount is actually on the current market value of the shares minus the exercise cost. And I think one big question here would be like, I'm a startup, I'm a private company, then what would be my market value? So I think that is where it's very interesting. So in terms of setting the market value, there's in general two ways. I think the most so-called proper or professional way is actually to get a valuation, from independent valuator, but that is not practical for startup because the cost is very high. So what we are seeing is that at the early stage company, it is possible, to negotiate and talk to your auditors to try to use the NAV of the company, as the benchmark. And why is that so? It's because at least there is some basis of calculations. Because even if you do valuation, that is also dealing with a lot of estimations, and it is, something that's still not as concrete. So that is something that you can keep in your mind, when it comes to the taxation part. The auditors have a high chance of, accepting it, but of course, they may argue against it. So end of the day, it depends on how you want to argue. But in general, there's, the two ways, either a valuation or you use the NAV. I think, and of course, you want to negotiate to use NAV because that's actually more beneficial to you. So, and it's for RSU, that's when the things get a bit tricky because you do not control when you get taxed. Because RSU, just now as mentioned, is shares that's already been issued to you. So since you're already being issued to you, what it means is that, the restriction will start to get lifted as you hit certain criteria. And the tax bill will actually hit you the moment some of the restrictions get, removed. And that is when that you get taxed. So, and you get taxed the full value of the shares because, there's no exercise price. And lastly, for phantom shares, is that it is because phantom shares is like a contract and not an equity. So you do not need to pay money, or you did not need to exercise it. But what happened is that in liquidity event, when someone to buy the company, you will actually receive the cash and you will be taxed the full amount of the cash award because it is a very clear cut, it's like a contract benefit. So that is the difference. I think the biggest difference here is the structure. And the second one is that when you get taxed. And I think that is the most important part. Point number 5, I'll talk about some of the misconceptions here.
Yep. Hi, Casper.
Yes.
We have a few questions in the chat box.
Sure.
Maybe you want to answer them first. Okay. Sure. Sean asked, when are each type used and what are use cases for the 3 types?
Sure. So for the first type, when we come to ESOP, it is more common, for startups. Okay. To be frank, RSU has been very popular in the 1980s, 1990s, but in recent years, it's not as popular. A reason being that RSU or phantom shares, it is like a contract and you need to issue shares. So, but in recent years, people like ESOP more because the difference between ESOP and RSU, let's throw away phantom for the moment because that one is totally different, is that ESOP, you give someone a right to buy a shares. So technically, the person is still not the owner of the shares or still not a shareholder. He just had the right, but he do not own it. So it will actually save a lot of administrative issue because you do not need to deal with the share issuing. You do not need to deal with, like the information sharing and all this. Whereas for RSU, you would issue them shares directly and then they become your shareholders. And then all the issues with shareholders will come in. So I think that's number one. And number two is that, ESOP is more easier for startup companies because the valuation is, the valuation increased quite significantly over the years. I think that's number one. And number two is that you want to shift the administration issue to later stage. That's number two. And number three is that there's no guarantee that the employees will be able to sell the shares in the unfortunate situation. So that's why you do not want them to constantly create trouble for you. So ESOP it will be used for, I would say, for startups from Series C all the way to, I would say, D and E, even later stage, because by then you can do something else. RSU is more for like a public company or listed company because they already have, a so-called a liquid market, and it's a lot easier to peg, against the market valuation. So you will issue RSU because you do not want to have another structure. Since the shares is already liquid, you will not run into the 50 shareholders issue. So you issue RSU when it comes to, so-called the public company. And phantom shares is really for founders who absolutely do not want to issue shares, but yet want the employees to so-called enjoy the financial benefits. So I think this is the three big difference. And when, yeah.
Hey, thank you, Casper, for your answer. I hope that answers your question, Sean. Next, we have another question. Can ESOP in Singapore registered company be given to anyone in the world? And can Svested manage ESOP globally?
Okay, so the answer here is yes to both. So when ESOP, if it's a Singapore company, which is very common, because a lot of companies that receive investment in Southeast Asia actually has the holding company in Singapore itself. So when it comes to that, you can issue ESOP or issue stock options to anyone in the world. The biggest question here is that when are they being taxed? So in Singapore, you are taxed when you exercise the shares. In Indonesia, for example, you get taxed when you actually sold the shares. So there's no restriction in receiving the shares. In Vietnam, although there is restriction on foreign share ownership, I was talking to many parties in Vietnam itself, although there's restriction, but they are not very strict in the restriction, as long as you do some form of reporting and also you pay your taxes, at the appropriate timing. Same for Philippines and as well. So, and also for, Europe and US. So the first question is, can I issue globally? The answer is yes. Second thing is that can Svested manage that, help you globally? Is yes, because ours is a digital platform that enables, founders to just issue the documents, so-called, to anyone working anywhere. So this both answer is yes. The third one is that I would just want to share is that the biggest difference or the only difference here would just be when you pay tax and how much tax to pay. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Casper. I think that was very, very clear. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other? If not, I'll continue to the misconceptions. Okay, so I'll just continue on. Thank you. So is that there are some misconceptions about, the ESOP. So I think the first thing which is most important here is that, to share is that ESOP does not appear on ACRA, and ESOP are not shares because ESOP are options too allowable for exercise. So I'll just share a very quick, on next slide, is that what does it means by ESOP does not appear on ACRA? I think this is a common misconception. So example, this is the cap table, So this is what you will file with ACRA. So in ACRA itself, you will file that the founders have actually 9 million shares, and that actually is 100% of the ownership. But if you have, let's say, an ESOP in place, which you need to draft it in your constitution, then how you look like is that there's this fully diluted cap table that will look like this. Like the founders actually own 9 million shares, but the ESOS or ESOP is actually 1 million. And that makes up 10% of the fully diluted cap table. So, and with that, ESOP is not being issued and it does not reflect on ACRA. So this is something that everyone needs to take note. Because I do see a company that make the mistake that they actually, issue out the ESOP to either some people or to some entity, and that will cause a lot of trouble because when company do a share buyback to right this wrong, there is certain limitations and certain forms that you need to sign, and those forms are quite nasty. If you want to know more, I can share later. But yeah, share buyback and capital reductions, you need to sign some pretty nasty form for the directors. So one key thing to take note, ESOP are virtual and you do not need to issue them. Okay, so I'll go back to the previous slides. Okay, the second thing is that need to clarify is that, vesting is not equal to exercising. So let's say, for example, today, I want to issue shares to Everett, example, like Everett, so let's say I'll issue him, like, example, 48,000 shares, to be vested across 4 years. So, and we vested across 4 years. So what it means is that, at every, it could be monthly. So after the first year, Everett will have 12,000 shares that's vested, and every other month, additional, 1,000 that'll be vested. So all these shares that are vested will be recorded, but there's no actions required from both parties, the company or the employees. So it's just a number that will constantly, be so-called calculated, the vested and unvested. And the biggest difference is that when a person leaves the company, the vested shares, usually they get to keep. So for example, let's say, Everett, if instead of him staying for like 4 years, he stayed for 2 years. So if he stayed for 2 years, then it is unfair for the company if he gets the whole entire 48,000 shares. But it is also unfair to him if he gets 0 shares. So that's where the vesting in place. So he vested for 2 years, so he gets 50% of what he's being issued. So 24,000 shares will be vested and he can get to keep, options can he get to keep. And then the other 24,000 options will actually be null and void. So I think that is the one thing to take note. And vesting is not equal to exercising. So when it's vested, you just have the option to buy, and you usually retain the options. When you exercise, that's when that you need to pay money and you convert the option into shares. And that's also the point when you appear on the accrual biz file as a shareholder. So when you do vesting, it is just purely everything recorded on paper. It's just like a paper record, official paper record. And when you do exercising, that's when that you need to do other things such as, paying for the shares, paying for taxes, and receiving the shares. So this is the big difference between vesting and exercising. And the third one is more for calculation. So ESOP can be calculated on a pre-money basis, on a post-money basis. So that will be depending on your negotiation with your investors. In general, your investors would want it to be post-money basis, because so that it don't dilute them. So it's just more of a terminology for calculations. And all this brings us to the point, and also the table that I show you is that, for all startup founders, you will need to maintain a fully diluted cap table. So what does it mean is that it is the table below, the fully diluted cap table, where you will need to keep track of, the ESOP pool itself. So then you will know a very clear view of exactly how much percentage you have or you own, in the company. So that's why, because the biz file will miss out certain details, so that's why the fully diluted cap table is very important. Yep, and I'll just continue on to the last point, and then after that we can open up to a full-fledged Q&A. So the last point and the most important point, and I guess what everybody is really looking forward to here, is like the planning and the key considerations when you set up an ESOP. So, and why is planning important? Because there is actually a lot of horror stories that I heard before. I think the first one that you may have heard before, and is probably more common in Southeast Asia, unfortunately, is that there's early employees that has been promised options, but they did not receive their ESOP. Because either the founders or the companies did not set up the ESOP plan, early, or, they did not issue it properly. So, and it happens very frequently because of all the challenges that we discussed, at the start. Once the founders close the fundraising round, they shift their focus to growing the company and not on all this administrative, which is why it's very important, to get ESOP sorted out right from day one. So at least then we will, stop this horror story of, a lot of employees saying that, oh, I joined this X and Y company, but end up they promised me ESOP and then I did not receive. It is not good for the company reputation as well. A lot of such cases, the company usually don't do well in a way, because, word spread around also. So that's why, ESOP is good to get it set up early. Next is actually negative equity due to taxation. So this happened mostly in the US and not in Southeast Asia, fortunately. And also why it's important to think about when you exercise. Because if you do recall, in Singapore, you pay tax when you exercise the shares. So I believe in US, you pay tax once it is either vested or is granted or it is exercised, because the tax law there is a bit more complex. So there is certain criteria. Once you hit, you actually need to pay tax. So what happened is that sometimes when you pay tax, the price of shares is actually very high. Example, let's say like WeWorks, at the height and all these, if you were to have equity at the height of the WeWork valuation, you'll pay a lot of taxes. But whereas now the valuation has dropped down, then end up, you have a negative equity issues. So, but that is very unlikely to happen in Southeast Asia, to be honest, or because the tax considerations is upon exercising. So what you can do is actually you can just don't exercise your shares and just hold it as an option. Then in that case, you will never run into a negative equity issue. And the third point is that, founder stake may be heavily diluted without proper planning because you have a 10% ESOP. So you may want to keep a little bit, for later stage. Because in fundraising, round on round, you get diluted by 20 to 25%. That's the standard round on round fundraising. So what it means is that every 3 rounds, your percentage ownership in the company will actually get half. So if you read recent news, like I think even for Grab founders, it's less with about 2.2%. And it's actually quite common because in Southeast Asia, dilution is quite high. So what it means is that, if you do proper ESOP planning, you can even issue ESOP to yourself. So later we'll talk about some things to help you, make that even sweeten the deal. So you might need to issue ESOP to yourself to increase your percentage. And lastly, you need to keep track of it because if you issue over the legal limit, so-called like example 10%, then you will run into legal issues. Because people may want their shares and you do not have enough to give, then you'll run into very nasty situations, and you absolutely want to avoid that because you do not want something that's being structured as a benefit to turn out into a huge legal tussle, and that would make you difficult to do fundraising and all of this. So you want to make sure that just by keeping it in a proper record, you can avoid all of these problems. And next we'll go into the key considerations in planning. So the first question will be who to give. So depending on founders, some give to the top management, some try to give it to everyone in the company. So that is up to individual founders. The second one is how much to give. So I think on Svested website, we'll probably post it up soon, like a quick planning guide. Like for example, if you are planning a C-level hires, depending on the stage of the company, there is certain a range that you can consider to give. Like for example, a C-level hires, if the company only raised like less than $1 million, you can consider giving them like between 0.5 to like 3%. And let's say if the company has raised like $10 million, then you may want to consider giving them between 0.5 to 1.5%. And if you raise 100 million, then it probably be like 0.5 to 1. So there's going to be this tiering effect. How much to give depends on the seniority of the person. That's number one. And number two is depending on the stage of the company. Because as the company becomes later and later stage, you give less and less percentage because the value of the stock is also higher. Next is the type and the capital structure. So in general, the employee stocks or the stock options will either be ordinary shares or it will be a special class of shares like employee shares that do not have voting rights. So it's usually either of these two. Next, the seniority of the staff, just as mentioned, if you hire a C-level, you want to issue them more shares. If it's a junior staff, then lesser. And of course, the stage of the company. And the idea is that you need to ensure do not overcommit. So a quick gauge here is that you should not utilize more than 70% of your ESOP pool. Because if you use more than 70% of your ESOP pool going into your fundraising, then there's a good chance that your investors will ask you to increase the pool because you will not have enough to make a significant hires. And also you make sure that you do not issue more than what's legally allowed, and you ensure that you have enough pool for future hires. So other key considerations are cliff investing type. So what is cliff?
A quick point on what's the legal restriction there? Because you keep talking about the legal restriction. What are you referring to here?
Sure. So just now you mentioned that, just now you also asked like what is the limited size of what is the size of the ESOP pool. So for example, once you have a fundraising in your shareholders agreement and in your company constitution, if you put the ESOP pool as a 10% ESOP pool, so that is your legal limit. That means you cannot issue more than 10%.
Got it.
Yeah, so that is what I meant by the legal limit. That is whatever that's allowed, in the company constitution itself. So if you put it as 15%, then the legal limit will be 15%.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, sure. So next,
Hi, Casper.
yes.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt because you have a few questions also in the chat box. Yeah,
Sure.
do you want to answer them? Okay. First question. Yeah, after you have issued ESOP, can you buy them back?
Yes, can. So because the way in Svested, we do help with the documentation as well. But because the way the ESOP is structured is a right to buy and not shares itself. So what it means is that when the person leave or when you want to do a share buyback or an ESOP buyback, you can always discuss with the staff, and if it's okay, all you need to do is just to drop a quick letter to say that I'm buying back how many of your options at what price, and then when both parties signs, you just need to pay and you can just dissolve of what the options. So yes, can.
Yep. Also, you mentioned that for those junior staff, you want to give a lesser proportion of the shares to them, right? So
Yeah.
Lina is asking, like, what is considered lesser to you? Does it go below 0.1%?
Yes, correct. So let's say, for example, if it's a very executive, very junior staff, you can even consider to give something like 0.01%. So in a way, it is more of a symbolic and more of number one, symbolic, and number two, recognitions. And if you look at the numbers itself, even if it's 0.01%, if the company reaches like $1 billion status, it's still worth quite a bit of money. That's number one. And number two is that, if you are to award them, it means that you treasure this stuff. And if they perform well, they will increase up the rank. It doesn't mean that ESOP you can only issue once. If they increase up the rank from executive to manager, you can actually do an ESOP top-up, like giving them another extra ESOP, so that you retain them even further, or you reward them for their, hard work. And of course, the third one is that, let's say if the employees, typical is a 4-year, vesting period. So if the employees, let's say, for example, Everett, if he's doing really well, what I will do, as a founder is that every 2 years, I will issue him a new ESOP plan. So which means that anytime he wants to leave a company, he will always need to leave something on the table because, he has multiple ESOP plan that's running around. Yep. Other questions? Or?
That's all for now. Okay,
Sure.
You can continue.
Got it.
Thanks, Casper.
Thank you. So some of the key considerations are the cliff. So a cliff is the amount of time an employee need to stay before the ESOP kicks in. So in general, the cliff is about 12 months or 1 year. So what it means is that if the employee join you, and he leave anytime within the first year, he will actually get nothing. Yeah, you don't want a situation where someone join you for 3 months or 6 months and end up getting some ESOP. So this is to prevent, employees from, so-called leaving early. So you have a 1 year cliff. So only after 1 year, then he will start to benefit from the, the ESOP. Next is the vesting type. There's either flat, which means that it is standard throughout the entire cycle, like maybe 1,000 per month, standard, or it could be staggered. Staggered means that, every year that's different. Not recommended because it's harder to, package it as a benefit. And the third one is KPI based. So for example, you can set KPI based for your sales team that if you reach like a 1,000 sales lead in 1 month, I'll give you a certain amount of options. So that is how you can use to link between the KPIs and also the financial benefit. So that is KPI based. And strike price is that, I get a lot of questions on strike price. So strike price, there's usually 3 types of ways to set a strike price. One is a very low strike price. The second one is the last round valuations. And the third one is a discount to the last round valuations. And this different way of setting strike price will impact how the company communicates with its staff. So, and in here, usually I will recommend using a low strike price, because if you use a low strike price, it's a lot easier to communicate as a benefit. That's number one. And number two is that as the company advances later and later in stage. So example, if a manager that you hire at seed, you give them like 100,000 shares, and it's a low strike price. And let's say at a later stage, when you reach Series B, the manager that you hire, you can just give them maybe 30,000 shares because the price has already gone up. And then the strike price is still very low. The strike price is the price they need to pay, to buy the shares. So because of the deviations, in price, what it means is that at later and later stage, you will need to issue lesser and lesser shares for the same value. This will help you to conserve your ESOP pool. And also it's a lot easier to communicate the benefit. Of course, the downside is that you will encourage exercise. The next one is that last round valuation or discount to last round valuations. Some people use it. In the US, they use it a lot because of a lot of tax issues. But in Southeast Asia, in general, there is not much of a difference. But if you the last round valuation, then the price will be very high, and the staff may be put off by it. That's number one. Number two is that, just now I was mentioning that founders get diluted heavily, over time. So if you use to last round valuation, and let's say if you're at Series E, if you want to issue shares to yourself, if you set a low strike price, the value of the shares, or let's say the benefit you get from the shares is a lot higher. If you set as the last round valuations, and if the company is worth like $1 billion, if you issue yourself 1%, in order to exercise the shares, you need to pay $10 million. And it may reach a certain point of time that it may not sound, it sounds ridiculous like in a way. So that is something to take note. And lastly, of course, it's about taxations, like, when you do a tax reporting. And that is to do with exercising and cashing out. So, and other key considerations is that, a company in Singapore, there's only 50 shareholders. Once the employee exercise the shares, they become a shareholders, and they have access to sensitive information. Not only that, in all your legal documents, you need them to sign. So I think this is one important thing that you need to take note when drafting the ESOP document, like how you're going to minimize all these issues, to allow employees to enjoy the benefit, and yet, you don't run into problems with the 50 shareholders and, informations. Certain potential ways are, for example, like setting up an SPV, pushing their so-called exercising by a period of time, when they leave the company, or even, issuing to the founders. These are some of the ways that you can, prevent these things from happening. And lastly, last slide here is that I think good planning is the key to success. Same thing for ESOP, because that will enable you to make sure that, everyone's benefits, from it. Yeah. So I think with that, I think that's the end of my presentation. Yeah, I think it go a bit longer than I was expected, but yeah, there's some questions coming in as well. So yeah, I'll just stop.
Thank you, Casper. Wow. Yeah, that was a wonderful sharing by you. Yeah, I personally learned a lot also. Okay, let's move on to the Q&A question. So first question by Sean, is the industry practice to use 1-year cliff and 4-year vesting throughout its life, or do the terms change through the lifetime of the company?
Okay, so I think in this case, the standard practice is a 1-year cliff and a 4-year vesting. That's pretty standard, but there's for some hires that you may want to change. Like for example, it could be a advisor or a special project one. Then that one, maybe you may want to change it to like a year, because it makes more sense. It's a short project. Or let's say for, advisors, it could be a mixture of so-called years and also KPIs. Because if you are based on KPI, then there'll be no cliff lah, because everything is tagged towards your KPI.
Okay, next question. Charles asks, what are some common exercise window structure? 90 days post employee departure, or is it 90 days post liquidity event? Then another question is, do vested ESOPs typically lapse when an employee leaves on good leave or remains with the employee until liquidity event?
Sure. So I will just answer in different phases. So what are the common exercise window structured? There is 2 ways to structure it. Either, the company can run a so-called exercise event, every once or twice a year, so that you will reduce the administrative issue. I mean, you do not want to issue shares every now and then, because then you need to update accrual, you need to do reporting. It's just going to be a huge mess. So you could be, number one, you set an exercising, so-called a period, once a year or once or twice a year, so they can consolidate all the interest and you exercise that. So I think that is a possibility. There's another possibility which actually will link to the rest, which is in a liquidity event, you can organize a so-called exercise period or even a buyout period to do settle the net difference. Like instead of them exercising, you can actually pay them a certain amount of fees and they void the shares. Then in this case, you do not need to do the share transfer. So that's another possible way. Then the third one is that, about departure. So I think in general, ESOP scheme is being structured to help the company. So there's always this term that they must exercise within 1 month after leaving the company. But just now we mentioned, if they exercise, they become your shareholders, they need to sign legal documents, you may want to prevent that from happening. So one common practice is that when a person leaves the company, you may want to issue them a letter and say that, or you left the company on which date, you have, let's say, 10,000 shares, that 10,000 options that is vested, and you have 30,000 options that is now and void. So then it becomes very clear cut how much options the person have and how much has been void. Then usually we will add one more line, is that we will extend your option exercising period by a period of 10 years till, for example, 31st December 2030. And this is how is a lot of time that is being used, because you want to push the exercising to a later date so that you do not have to deal with all these administrative issues. So this is one way that a lot of companies that do it if they don't want to let them exercise. Then the second one is that, does it lapse? Okay, so if it's a good lever, just now as per mentioned, you can either extend it by a period of 10 years, or you can write some side letters to, promise them to a buyout of their shares at the next liquidity event, So I'll say that is, these two are the two common ways. Either you extend, or you just have a side letter and says that, okay, you will buy back at a later time. I think these two. If it's a bad lever, there is a chance that you can void all the shares. Like for example, if it's a fraud and all these, then there's a good chance that you can void all the shares, whether is it vested or unvested.
Good lever, of course, you never void, right? It's completely not market practice to void if the person.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Good lever, you don't void. But just now I mentioned about vesting. So if the person still have unvested shares, the unvested shares will be void.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Does anybody have any more questions?
Actually, I have another question related to what you said about the net settlement. How common is that, and how complex is it to set up?
You mean for the ESOP?
Yes. So let's say there's an exercise event the person wants to exercise. They might not have the cash to buy the shares. And so maybe the company can give an option to have a net settlement instead of a gross settlement. Is that a common practice to offer that, or not really? Or...
Yes, it is a common practice as well for later stage company, because as exercise, you need to issue shares. So the truth is that the employees most of the time just want to receive the financial benefit. So there's always a way to do a net settlement. So yeah, so I'll give you the difference between your exercise price and the current market price. And then after that, I will just pay you and you'll just void the shares. So it is also a common practice, yes.
Casper, is there a market or rather industry benchmark for how we should calculate the dollar value of ESOP that we are granting? Because I remember Union Square wrote something like 1 to 2 against the annual income, the annual salary granted to that employee.
So I would say that there isn't a very well-defined number. I would say that there's a mixture of two factors. One is the seniority of the person, and number two is the so-called the value. So that's why the range is actually very wide. I mean, it can give up to almost close to 20% of the annual income. I think that's a possibility, like close to 20% of the annual income. And then plus you need to fall within the range of their benchmark. Like for example, if it's a C-level higher, or if it's a more junior, higher, then you use the range and then plus the salary, and then from that you come up with a number that makes sense for both.
Hi, Casper.
Hello, hi Jane.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, Jane, do you have any question for Casper?
Oh, no. I just joined the session. I'm just here to listen and hear from Casper about ESOP.
Yeah. Okay. If anyone don't have any question yet, Casper, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So speaking about employees' departure, right? Employees leaving on good lever, but what about those employees who left on bad terms? And then they could be like the senior employees who have acquired like a large number of shares through the vesting period and enjoy like substantial voting rights as a result. So like if you're a founder and you don't want this senior staff to leave on bad terms to still enjoy these kind of voting rights, how do you prevent like these kind of pitfalls?
Sure. So I think in the ESOP scheme, the documentation itself, it has a clause for good lever and bad lever. So in the event of a bad lever, the company can actually take the actions to take back all the shares, either void all the shares or take back all the shares, on the bad lever ground. And so I think that is what that helps to protect the company. So yes, you can take back, you can claw back everything.
Thank you for answering my question. Alvin, have a question for you. So the question is, can founders buy back shares at any time?
Okay, the question is, are you buying back from maybe Alvin, can you just clarify a bit? Are you buying from investors or you're buying from employees, or yeah? Either. Okay, the truth is that I would say share buyback can happen anytime as long as you have the funds to do it and someone is willing to sell. Just take note that if you have investor in the company, the investors will have this thing called the right of first refusal. So if someone wants to sell the shares, technically it needs to be first offered to the investor first. And if the investors do not want to take out the offer, then I think the founders can. So it depends on the the class of shares that you're holding as well. But quick answer is that yes, you can buy back anytime. And the longer answer will be that yes, with approval. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Do anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Casper, where's my beta invite? 1 month ago already, you say you sent me.
Yeah, no, I think I thought my team already linked up to you, but definitely I'll send you another invite. You are not beta anymore. You are going to be a more advanced user already. Yeah.
Can. Thanks, man.
Hey, thank you.
Yep. If not, if there's no more questions, we have come to the end of our session with Casper. Thank you, Casper, for taking the time to join us, and thank you everyone else for coming here. We hope you had a good session. And actually, we do have an upcoming fireside chat on. It's a collaboration between Asia Institute of Mentoring and Asia Startup Network. So I'll leave the sign up link in the chat box below, and you guys can look at it.
Basically, Yan Wu Chao, he has invited like ecosystem here to discuss about venture creation and apply it. So I think it would be a useful session. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Okay. We have recorded this session, so we'll be sending the recording link later. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Okay, thank you, Casper.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you. See you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, really insightful sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.